Okay, Tanil, it's recording, right?
Yeah, I got a notification.
Okay, super. Well, I'm on we start. Would you like to wait a little bit longer? Okay, people are still joining, so I'll wait.
Okay.
I'll just start with the introduction a little bit.
Sounds good. I just made another post.
Okay. So, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you to tonight's session of the URNA Design Workshop Lecture Series. The URNA Design Workshop is a cornerstone of our team's preparations for the Malta Pavilion at the London Design Biennale 2025. This evening's session is particularly special as it brings together a very close collaborator of ours, a friend and a key member of our collective URNA, which is Tanil Raif. I personally first met Tanil in 2020 when our paths crossed during a very unique moment in both our careers. At the time, Tanil was working for Kanye West and I was immersed in the world of Palero Jati. Even then, I was struck by Tanil's innovative vision, his ability to craft spaces that are as emotionally profound as they are technically sophisticated. I also admired his relentless curiosity, his openness, and his desire to pursue architecture's deeper meanings. For me, Tanil's work is defined by a fascination with cutting into the earth predominantly, creating spaces that feel elemental, timeless, and inseparable from their surroundings. Over the years, his collaborations with cultural and creative forces such as Kanye West, Bianca Sensori, Cult Gaia, Yeezy, and Mad Architects have only strengthened his ability to transcend boundaries and craft narratives that resonate far beyond architecture. As co-leader of this workshop, alongside myself and Andrew Borg Wirth, Tanil brings a perspective that challenges us to rethink what architecture can be. His presence in the URNA collective and his leadership in this workshop continue to enrich our shared vision for the Malta Pavilion at the London Design Biennale 2025. So please join me in welcoming Tanil Raif.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Let's see. And you guys have to turn on sharing, I think.
Okay, Tanil, I'm coming. Sorry.
No worries.
Feels like it's COVID again. No.
What a time that was.
Yes, recording. Tanil, I made your house so you can share.
All right.
Ciao, ciao.
All right. Thank you. Let's go. All right. Is everything fine? You guys can see my screen?
Yeah, thank you, Tanil.
Perfect. Okay, so thank you everybody for joining me today. I'm very excited to share some recent work and to also build up on my past lecture with Bianca Sensori, which was Primitive Futurism, that Antony hosted as well. But it's totally fine if you haven't seen that lecture. This is an independent lecture on its own, but it does build on some of those ideas. And so I wanted to start with this image of the Earth. This is one of the first images of the Earth that we have taken. And looking at it from a distance, we can sort of understand to perceive it as this almost singular form or mass. However, in contrast to that, if we actually zoom into different parts of the Earth, we can actually start to understand the complexity and the variation of the surface of the Earth, depending on what part you are zooming into. And in contrast to that, this is an image of a city that could be now in any continent. It could be New York, it could be Beijing, it could even be in Europe. So with this idea of globalization of architecture, despite the surface makeup of our Earth being having a lot of variation, our building materials have been reduced with globalization to primarily three different materials. So that is steel, concrete, and glass. And this obviously the idea of globalized architecture was pushed forward with modernism, and modernists had a very specific idea of nature and the city. Here we're looking at Central Park in New York City by Olmsted. And we can see a very specific vision of how nature was seen, where there's this certain adjacency to the city, but the two don't overlap. So they're almost seen as these two very distinct and different worlds that one can choose to enjoy when they want to. And we can sort of understand this as a binary vision almost. And we can further prove this point if we look at the plan drawings of Central Park, where we can start to understand and see that the park is depicted with these organic paths and these rocks that are almost scattered in a chaotic manner. And then if we look at the city itself, it's this very sort of mundane grid, and there's no relationship between the two. And if you ask me, the way humans live their life is much more closer to the way the park is depicted rather than the city itself. And if we zoom from the city to the scale of the building, we can look at some modernist examples like this Le Corbusier Villa Savoye, where one thing I want to point out here is the sort of separation between the machine of architecture, which is the building, and nature again, where one of his points was the horizontal window. Why the horizontal window is because humans primarily perceive Earth horizontally. We have a larger horizontal field of view than vertical. And so the purpose of this horizontal window becomes a way to frame nature and to sort of look at it from afar without having any sort of real physical relationship to nature and ecology itself. In contrast to that, we can see many sort of ancient examples where local material were sourced to build cities. And although the cities don't exactly look like their surrounding, they do have some reminiscence. And obviously, a great example of sustainable material use, and we definitely need sustainability more than ever. So, and in this example, we look at the unfinished obelisk in Egypt, where we can start to understand form that is literally being carved out of the earth itself. And here is another example, the mounds of Bahrain, where this idea of the living and the dead coexist through more processed material and more organic material. So unlike the sort of example of Central Park, where it's about an adjacency and they're two separate things, here they're almost being juxtaposed. These two different worlds are almost being juxtaposed onto each other. And while sort of I find architecture to primarily have failed in this movement of trying to bridge the gap between ecology and nature, I do find that the land art movement was a really good contributor to that. So in this example, which is a desert breath that I also talked in my last lecture, we can sort of understand the series of concave and convex forms that are forming from the land. And we can sort of understand this as the almost circular economy of the site, where all the material that starts on the site always remains on the site, and all the form is given to the place from material that is provided from the site itself. And in this image, which was taken a few years after the Desert Breath was conceived, we can sort of see a few things that are happening. We can see this excavation and how it has created a microclimate. So the microclimate is actually causing for new species to grow that actually normally doesn't exist. But at the same time, we can see how this sort of excavation is also collecting trash. So I think this is quite this image is quite a testament to the power humans have, where they can actually work with nature to create more life, but they can also destroy nature and be destructive. And there's other examples which also act more in utilitarian ways. So for example, the Mill Creek Canyon earthwork was commissioned as an art commission, but it had a very specific purpose to control flooding and to sort of enable the site to be a public space. And again, when we look into water and sort of edge conditions, Robert Smithson is a pioneer in this, where he can start to negotiate the sort of boundaries of sort of his work and the edge conditions, and sort of work with ecology and change and time. So he's not interested in full permanence, but change over time, which I think we as architects must embrace. And this is a more contemporary work of land art by Dana Stratu in 2023. She was actually the person who also created Desert Breath with two of her friends. But in this example, we can see that she's marking the traces of water on the site that eventually become paths and lead to the source. And I just want to point out how subtle this work of art is, where it doesn't require crazy amounts of construction or manipulation. And I really want to show these subtle examples, specifically also for the people who are in the URNA charrette who are going to make proposals. And I want to say that, you know, they don't have to be these elaborate construction heavy projects. And also what I like about this is the idea that, again, it's going to transform and change and potentially disappear over time. And here we can see an example of this square in Tirana, where the architects control the level of evaporation. So during times when it rains, we are able to get these sort of patterns that emerge on the site. However, one also very important thing about this work that I really love is the different stones that we can see on the square were all collected from different areas of the city and the country. So again, this idea of locally extracting and creating something new by bringing these different elements together. And here we can see how the architects start to draw these sort of changes in the way the water flows on this surface, which is a very simple drawing, but very beautiful. And also it is describing something very effective. And another project that also deals with water it's called the Restoration of the River. I believe it's in Switzerland, where there was a river that was sort of kind of going out of control and growing in a faster rate than it was supposed to. And so the landscape architects in this example proposed to sort of create this pattern onto the landscape, where the pattern eventually starts to negotiate with the flowing water to create something new and to create new ecology. And at the same time, sort of the pattern tames the water and the rate in which it is moving. And here is sort of an image of the change over time and sort of the new ecologies that are being created. And again, sort of tracking this change over time. And then another example by Teresa Moeller, The Stairway to Heaven, where again, this idea of contextual use of stone, where an artist, actually an architect in this case, takes something local and applies the sort of force of human onto it, and then rearranges it on the site to be able to sort of create the stair that enables us to experience the site in a new way while also respecting the material. And this is a diagram by Lina Gottme from her lecture actually called Future Archaeologies. When I heard future archaeologies, I was like, I should have thought of this first. You know, it is totally primitive futurism, but I really find interesting the sort of future and the archaeology part in this diagram, where archaeology becomes the research, the past, the place, the stories, the earth, and the memory. And the future becomes the emergence, questioning, originality, equality, technology, and innovation. And we also have the humane side, which is kind of like the humanities, and we have, you know, nature. So what does it mean to sort of nurture nature? Very interesting architect. I really enjoy her work. And from there on, I want to talk about our project URNA. I know the class has been briefed on URNA, but there's external people, so I'll touch up lightly on this project before moving on to some of my other personal projects and collaborations. But essentially, URNA is a new way of dealing with human remains and how we handle human remains. And the proposal takes place in Malta, particularly in the abandoned stone quarries, where cremation is kind of newly sort of starting to become a thing in Malta, but it is still not there yet. And so this was sort of our take on this process of handling human remains. And this is an image from the London Design Biennale project we have that we won. So a part of this URNA will be at the Design Biennale. And to sort of dive a deeper into the project, this image, which is also by one of our collaborators on the project, Thomas, this is sort of like a description of the sedimentary relationship of this stone we have in Malta. And we were very interested in this sedimentary layering because we almost see this idea of the stone as it is so almost like made up from different organisms that were once alive and now are dead, and they have become this stone. And we are very interested in layering the human within this geological history of Malta. But it is not just about like the geological history, but also the cultural sort of history of what this sort of particular material means for Malta. So in my opinion, the ritual itself is very much so about the material and about layering, you know, this idea of the next phase of human. And so each sphere in this case represents multiple humans. We can sort of start to understand this layering process through this diagram. And spheres you know, I get asked, especially at the GSD, like, why a sphere? Because it is such a sort of like anti-form sort of way of education. And I think, you know, one answer we have to that is that there's something universal about the shape of the sphere, and we wanted this project to be universal for any religion and any person that may be there. This is an image of the spheres that were excavated in Costa Rica. There's many of these excavations, and the exact purpose is not known. However, it is not only humans that have this desire to create spheres, but also nature, where we can see this example from Argentina, where the wind sort of, with thousands of years of passing through these rocks, have shaped them to become spherical. And next we have the another project that I'm going to talk about, which takes place in Kentucky. So this is a strip mine in Kentucky. And this is what it looks like currently. This project is in collaboration with Maddie Ferrer, and this is actually her thesis site. So I was very lucky for her to invite me to work on a few sort of satellite projects on the site. But essentially, what is happening here is that in order to get access to the coal, which is seen as valuable, we have to sort of blow the top of the mountain, which, somehow is not seen valuable. And so you almost get these like crater and valley-like conditions on the site. But one very interesting thing is that once the mountain is blown off, all these pieces of rocks are scattered throughout and just dumped into these valleys and craters that are created. Here we can see Maddie actually on the site, who she visited the site a few times in order to collect data and understand what is exactly going on here. And so we thought to ourselves, like, why see this as almost like a waste product or a byproduct of something valuable, but could we actually start to understand this waste as something valuable? So we started to sort of speculate on what we could do, and the first part of the process was we started scanning some of these rocks digitally to create a catalog in terms of shape, size, dimension, etc. And again, this is a process that is highly sort of digital, like we're taking something that is very organic and we're applying something digital to it. And I find always something very exciting when we can take this sort of ancient object that is 1 million years old, and then we take this piece of technology that is quite new, and then we can understand something new and something not done before about that object. So in this case, what we started to do was the obviously working with the irregular shapes of the stone is quite difficult, but we started to run an algorithm where we place bounding boxes around all these scanned stones we have. And so that becomes the box becomes a negotiation of the industry standards and how we conventionally measure things against the sort of irregular shape of the stone itself. And then we sort of took those boxes, the sort of bounding boxes of each stone, and we arrayed it throughout the site because we also had a 3D scan of our site. And we told the algorithm, we said, the larger the mass, put it higher, and the smaller the mass, put it lower into the sort of man-made crater. And so the result is that we sort of got this art installation that we call Story of the Mountain. So the stone almost here becomes an ancient memorial of the site's past life. And this was also in collaboration with Jing Liao. One thing I want to note is that we really believe in the power of art and how it can raise awareness and it can transform place. And this has been proven over and over again. I mean, there's so many examples throughout the world where, art can really create place. So we really do think that if we're able to fund this project, that it may be able to bring value to the site and also raise awareness to these sort of ecological things that are going on the site. Here again, we sort of have an image, a plan, sort of looking from above of this memorial. Then we wanted to sort of take this a step further, and we were like, okay, we sort of have this proposal of art, but can we also just take it another step further and see if we can use it as a means of construction? And so this is a systems map that Maddie, me, and Navia worked on together, where we sort of start to map the sort of societal, political, environmental, and economical benefits of using this waste stone, the potential benefits of using this waste stone. And you can really sort of start to understand, it's not just the big picture, but there's many small factors like a chain reaction that sort of starts to benefit if we are able to use these stones. Even think about like lowering the transportation costs, not extracting, that leading to less CO2 emission, using healthy materials, stuff like that. And again, we sort of continue running an algorithm on the stone in order to understand how they could start to fit into each other. And then we sort of were like, okay, we sort of understand these sort of irregular shapes, but again, can we apply a layer of technology onto this in order to have these stones become construction material rather than waste? So we currently are working on this, and we're speculating on this idea where we have this 3D printed robotic arm. It understands the sort of geometries and the shapes because they're all recorded in a catalog. And the arm starts to build these sort of unique jigs for each stone before it's being placed onto another. And this material as well, we hope that it can actually come from Earth itself. So again, everything that is being, or most of the things that are being used are relying on the site's circular economy. And this is sort of a sort of really quick study of what that could start to look like in smaller scale, where we used our scanned stone, we told the system to create a jig, and then we 3D printed it to see if, you know, the accuracy was enough. And I also want to note that, you know, some of these technologies are not even that complex. Like the stones were actually scanned with iPhones, so it's an app. And then lastly, I want to talk about my sort of current project that I have been developing in Yuanyang, China. This is a man-made landscape in the Yuanyang region where rice cultivation has been a thing for thousands of years. And so the site is shaped both by human intervention and ecology, and it sort of creates this beautiful form. However, this form is more utilitarian than artistic because it serves as a very sort of specific purpose, and people rely on this in order to make money. And so the brief sort of stated that the government there is asking for a new architectural proposal in order to make to sort of put this place on a map and make it a hub for tourism. And I sort of refused in this scenario to create a building, but rather I wanted to create a land art that we could actually experience the terraces in three-dimensional form rather than just look at them from afar. And there's another important part is that by working with the rice terraces to create this land form, I wasn't the only author, but also the people who have shaped this landscape for thousands of years all start to become the author. So the authorship relates to culture as well. And in this image, we sort of start to see the gradient where white represents areas being extracted and the black represents areas that are being mounded up. And so we sort of start to understand the site as these series of mazes that create paths that open up to the landscape. And again, the circular economy of the site is a topic that is super, super important to me this semester. And so the site again becomes material and material becomes site. So what is extracted from the site always remains on the site. And we start to get these relationships once we start to manipulate the site that are sort of quite foreign to the site actually. And this is sort of what the current condition of the site looks. And I want to point out that I'm just using a little piece of this very large site. So it's not as if like I'm taking over the whole rice terraces and I'm telling it should be a big work of art. Absolutely not. And then this is sort of what the initial intervention looks like when the site becomes spatialized. And then I also want to talk about ecology and how that will affect the site. So this work is not meant to be permanent and it's meant to change. And every phase of this change is seen as the work of art as much as the first phase. And here we can sort of understand the sectional ascend and descent of the spaces, where we can start to see these sort of more narrow spaces and paths, and then these areas that open up and lead to larger paths. So this is a space where you could sit down or you could be active and walk and jump around and do whatever you want. And here we can see this sort of connection that I hope, regardless of what you're doing on the site, is to sort of like look into the sort of depth of the earth and have this sort of special moment and connection, almost sort of romanticizing Earth in a way. And here's sort of another more overall view of the site and the intervention. And again, a view of what it might look like once these ecological factors like water and sunlight and air sort of start to interact with the site and how that may change over time. And then again, this may lead up to become a rice terrace again years later. And this is sort of the last section of the sequence, where the sequence ends by passing through this sort of almost gate-like condition, where this is the only part of the project where you actually pass under the earth. And this is made possible by this steel sort of object that we place onto the site so that it holds earth into place and sort of acts as this gate. And I hope that one day this sort of object that I place on the site as well will also be covered. And then I hope that 1,000 years later, someone may dig and discover this object and wonder why it was actually there. And this is sort of the last part of the sequence where you pass through this gate and it opens back to the rice terraces, and you're connected back to the immediate surrounding context again. Thank you, guys. This was the last slide. I hope you enjoyed.
Thanks, Tanil.
Thank you.
Tanil, if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind asking you a few questions, like based off
Of course.
of your lecture.
Actually, maybe I should keep my screen share too.
So, I mean, Tanil, let's say thank you very much for your lecture. It was amazing,
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
But I mean, we've known each other for a long time, but to be honest, this is the first time we've worked on a project together based in Malta, right? So Andrew remarked as we were listening to your lecture that it's very nice and fresh to hear someone from somewhere so far away talk about our condition here in Malta. Let's say, as someone approaching this URNA from your external perspective, how do you interpret its connection to the Maltese culture, ritual, and materiality? You want to expand a bit on, after all these months, how you kind of understand URNA in a Maltese context?
Yeah, I mean, I think, from my understanding, the island, and obviously, a lot of my understanding also comes from discussions that I've had with you guys, but I really see Malta as being made up of almost this material where there's a lot of quarries and a lot of this extraction happening. Therefore, there's also this material exists in the daily life of people, where I assume you guys experience or encounter it on a more regular basis than I would in Boston. Is that correct assumption?
Yes, no, totally. I would say actually today, I spoke to Andrea, who gave the lecture yesterday, and he called Malta monomateric. It's a word I had never heard.
Like in my idea of Malta, it is sort of very limestone, this sort of particular stone association. And again, the cultural connection to the material is important, but also like making something new with the material is also as important. So, again, there's this sort of balance of understanding like the existing sort of situation, but then also, saying, okay, well, but we want to sort of now have this material represent a new thing, a sort of like next phase of life for the sort of deceased.
Yeah. And like based off this, and maybe even like these last two projects, I noticed, let's say, more than ever, you're drawn to the act of somehow cutting into the ground.
Yes.
Let's say before it was much more about overground, and now it feels much more about being in the ground. And let's say, what do you believe this reveals about this relationship between architecture and the earth? You started with this image of the globe, and now you've ended with people kind of deep in it.
Yes, yeah. I think that's a quite interesting observation. Yeah, Honestly, I think at some point especially like in my studies here, I've realized this sort of almost failure by architecture to sort of understand and react to ecology. And sort of I also understood land art to be one of those movements where it actually did understood and it really started to, if we look at some of like the spiral jetty, like it really works with ecology. So I think more and more I sort of am drawn to bridging that gap between, architecture and land art. And the more I explore it, I feel like the more I crave to do this. And I mean, this is a studio project where we're, I think, 9 people and 8 of us are actually having like literal built like solid buildings. And this is the only proposal that is not a building because in my opinion, I don't think a building is necessary to revitalize this place. However, I will argue that this is as much architecture as the buildings that people are proposing on this site currently.
Yeah, no, I agree. And let's say, when I see all these things, I see you like almost have a desire to move away from a surface level understanding of aesthetics and architecture. Let's say,
Yeah.
what does it mean to you for the human experience, let's say, when it comes to architecture and one's experience of it? How do you approach this? Let's say it feels like a lot of the work you make is very experience driven or experience orientated. Do you correlate experience of space with architecture very much?
Definitely. I think, space and form is crucial to architecture. I mean, it is architecture itself. I mean, that's what architecture is made up of. And, in academia in the US, I really see people shy away from this idea of form. But I want to argue that, form is a tool to drive space and the conditions and the way we interact with ecology. It is not just this sort of aesthetic agenda. And, any decision you make, in my opinion, in the physical world is a formal decision. So I'm really all for it. And I really think that experience and form are tied to each other. And it is so much more than just aesthetics when we say experience.
And I have one last question, which is a bit of a tricky one. But
Uh-oh.
let's say, no, but it seems like today more than ever, you seem to have more of an agenda, more of a message to send out. Like, I feel like from 2.5 years ago, you've become more emboldened with certain aspects of architecture. So I want to ask you, what do you think is the role of an architect today?
I think, first of all, your observation is, 100% correct. I think in some ways I have evolved. I criticize the sort of academic sort of setting of the US a lot in terms of like the anti-form, but there's also really sort of positive aspects of it where we sort of like try to understand ecology and all this sort of stuff that relate to nature in a more sort of scientific way. But I would argue that, we are not scientists, we are not philanthropists, we're not all these sort of,
We're not
we're not
therapists.
politicians. And I think an architect's role is space and space making and experience. However, we don't have to be masters in all of these different topics, but we have to understand to sort of intellectually and cleverly interact with these in order to shape these forces that, our world needs.
No, I agree. Good. We're on the same page.
Of course, we've always been.
I've always been. I don't know if anyone else has a question or in the room or on Zoom, maybe, just to open it up.
I have a little question about the rock project where you had the small rocks in the middle and the bigger in the end. Was this just visually, or did you guys actually do this?
So that project is a speculation of a proposal we want to make. But what we did was essentially we scanned a few rocks. Like, we didn't scan like all the rocks on the site because we don't have funding for that currently, and that would take some labor. But we scanned a few rocks, and then we sort of multiplied those rocks for the sake of the exercise in order to say, okay, let's say if we actually had scan of 200 rocks, and we were to tell the algorithm to sort of organize it in a specific way, what would it look like? So that's sort of where that exercise is coming from.
Tanil, I don't know whether everyone in the call knows, but the workshop is set on sort of 9 different sites, right? Where we're testing the universality of our proposal of URNA. And it's something we discussed quite a lot, and it's part of what you're studying there, right?
Yep.
Could you maybe share for the students and everyone listening, what are your ambitions, aspirations for what we can see out of this kind of like system adapted to these sites, which we've kind of chosen for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the thesis of the lecture very much so like zooming out to the world and then zooming into the surface of the earth and understanding that the earth is made up of very sort of complex materials, and the surface sort of varies depending on where we are. And so we have this desire to create something universal where, the core idea of URNA is universal. However, it can also then be applied to different contexts, and that there's something beautiful about that. So, I think my very much so like my main desire for this project is an exploration of material practice. Like when I say material, the context and it's sort of both physical and cultural material contexts, and how that can shape URNA and still become a universal sort of force within, a way we deal with cremation. Now, for maybe, for some other people in our group, URNA might be more, the ritual aspect of URNA might be more important. Like when I looked at some of the examples Antony was presenting at our brief meeting, his examples are very like ritual dependent. And on my case, I would say mine are more like material dependent. So that is sort of like my aspiration, this sort of focus on context and material.
Amazing.
Cool. Okay, we have to go back to critiques now, Tanil.
Yes, fun.
But we will, Tanil, if you want, you can share it with whoever you want, and we will send over the file to you.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so
Super.
much for listening, and thank you for having me.
Yes, and thank you everyone for attending online and in person. We'll see you in a couple of minutes, Tanil.
All right, I will, yes. Okay.
All right, ciao. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.